I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us again, a favorite guest. I've been pinged. I know when I have to have her on because people start asking for her to come on. Of course, she is the publisher of the Solari Report at Solari.com. We're going to get to this in just a minute. Enforce the Constitution or kiss your money goodbye. Catherine Austin Fitts is the guest. Catherine Austin Fitts handled billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in portfolio as assistant housing secretary with Bush 41. Also, she is an investment banker and investment advisor extraordinaire. And I really appreciate having you on. Catherine Austin Fitts, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
It's great to be back, Greg.
Well, listen, there's so many things to talk about. I want you to just talk about some of the stuff that's going on, and I want to start with the Jared Kushner thing that was wall to wall last week, which is basically he got punked, basically. But you started with this, and I want to end with this. But it's a reason why they're staying nonstop on that. Why is the reason they're staying nonstop on the Trump collusion phony story?
If you look at what's going on in the federal government, whether it's the president agenda of tax reform, infrastructure, and healthcare, or what's happening in the state and local governments, such as Illinois, what is clearly happening is there's tremendous pressure to not spend money on the general population. And that's got all of the president's initiatives stalled. And of course, it's a major conversation in the state and local government and the pension funds. So, Greg, for example, we bailed out the banks with $27 trillion. Clearly, we can afford to bail out the pension funds, but they don't want to have that conversation. And so the question is, how can the corporate media get high ratings in a way which is totally distracting the average person from the real conversation, which is, what are we going to do about healthcare? How are we going to re-engineer our infrastructure? What are we going to do about state and local pension funds? And how are we going to get our state and local governments back on a financially accountable path? And the problem is the federal government is not on a financially accountable path. And that's why our second quarter wrap-up was about enforce the Constitution. There's an effort underway essentially to tear up the Constitution because they want to make sure it's torn up and doesn't provide a legal mechanism to enforce once everybody figures out that the money stolen during the financial coup d'etat is going to hit their pocketbook and hard.
I wanted to. You brought this up a while ago about why you live in Tennessee, and that Tennessee is a very solvent state. And if you look at some of the latest data out, I mean, it's one of the top 5 best well-run states. Illinois is on the bottom of worst-run states, and they have huge budget problems. They owe hundreds of billions of dollars in pensions and bonds, and just the cash that they spent $15 billion they owe. They don't have the money for. They passed some crazy budget,
Right.
wouldn't cut a thing. But anyway, I digress. I was driving back from from the central part of the country, from a farm in Missouri, and I drove through Illinois, and they got the mowers about 2 mower lengths, from the highway. Everything else is weeds up to over your head. They got on 57 going south, both roadside, rest centers were closed down for some unknown reason. You drive through Kentucky, which is also having a problem, but they at least cut their grass. And then you get into Tennessee, and it looks like you're on a golf course.
Right.
It's beautiful.
Right.
Everything's open. Everything looks good. Everything's good. This is what you're talking. This is some of the visual signs of states that are in big trouble.
If you drive through Tennessee, you will see a much more modest infrastructure and a much more modest state. In other words, the housing market was never pumped and dumped in Tennessee the way it was. The mortgage fraud and the fraud was never as bad as it was in other states, and we didn't begin to have the sort of growth Ponzi scheme that other states have had. I told this story on USA Watchdog, but I'll tell it again. When I was both Assistant Secretary of Housing and then the lead financial advisor to HUD, I due diligenced many, many neighborhoods, Greg, where HUD was spending $250,000 per unit to construct public housing, and $50,000 would buy and rehab a foreclosed property in that neighborhood. And I remember I took to the assistant of the person who ran the public housing construction program. I took them the due diligence of 30 or 40 neighborhoods or areas, urban areas around the country where you could get 5 homes for the price of 1. And I said, look, let's just optimize by place and do what has a positive return on investment to taxpayers. She looked at me, turned bright red, and said, but how would we generate fees for our friends? And we've had 50 years of fees for our friends at federal, state, and local government, as opposed to holding government investment to the same standards that private investment is held to. And with falling interest rates and everybody wanting to pump out more bonds, look what's happened. So we have built an infrastructure that doesn't make economic sense, and we're going to have to change. Now, what's happening in state and local government budgets, it's the same thing that's happening in healthcare. It's the same thing that's happening in all these different areas, which is we have engineered government investment to prop up the stock market. From 1955 to 1995, the GDP of this country grew approximately at the same rate as the revenues of the Dow Jones Index. But from 1995 on, we did two things. We instituted the WTO and the Uruguay round of GATT, and then we did the financial coup d'etat. And what happened? The Dow revenues have been growing at more than double the GDP growth. Well, that's a giant sucking sound into the stock market. And Washington, you and I have talked about this on many USA Watchdogs, Washington is basically run for the political campaign contributions that come off generating capital gains in the stock market. And the problem is that to get that rise in the equity markets, we've ended up pumping out enormous amounts of government debt and government money in a way that has a negative return on investment to taxpayers. It's not sustainable, and the game's up.
Do you think the game is up this fall? Do you think that we come, because there are all kinds of rumblings from Jeffrey Gundlach. I know you're a billionaire investor. People like Bill Gross. People like Ray Dalio saying it's the end of the central bank model. We should all thank them. I mean, a lot of big people are sending out these warnings.
I'll tell you when the game was up. Jeff Gundlach called the end of the long-term bond market. The Great Bond Bull, I think it was June of 2016. And then in the annual wrap-up, what I said is, okay, we've been slow. I've told you for 15 years it's going to slow burn. What I'm telling you is that's over. We're now into controlled demolitions. Now, who gets hurt in a controlled demolition really depends on the particulars of your unique situation. But we have now devastated pension funds all over this country, particularly the state and local pension funds. We've devastated municipal budgets, and we have devastated a lot of companies that depended on investment earnings coming from the fixed income markets, particularly in the insurance industry. And what we're now starting into is a process of what I call controlled demolition. So when Dallas says you either give us $1 billion to fund up the pension fund, or we're going to cut benefits, or CalPERS has started scaling back benefits for different members depending on their municipality. That's what I call a controlled demolition. So you have people all over this country who think they're going to get a pension benefit of X, and what they're about to discover is they're going to get 50% to nothing of what they expected. That's a controlled demolition.
Donald Trump's budget, I'm surprised to see this on the CBO, that I think 2027, his budget will cut the deficit in half. And I don't think that's what Washington wants. They don't want the deficit cut in half. Do they?
Well, here's the problem. Let's go back to the campaign. You had one group of people running who wanted to rebuild North America, and Trump's message was very much rebuild the North America economy. You had another group of people who wanted to really strip the United States to continue to promote empire. And what happened was Trump then arrives in Washington, embedded in a matrix structure. And right now the negotiation is both teams want to do 100% of what they want, and the budget can't tolerate it, which is why everything keeps breaking down when it hits the budget. Now, the problem is what you most need to do is you need to reinvent. You need a new vision of America's role in the world and a military to complement it, and very much a re-engineered military. But of course, that's not what the special interests and defense contractors want. So what did Trump do? He just threw $50+ billion at it, but that bounces over to the Senate. What did McCain do? He came back and said, okay, $109 billion more. This is why they want to talk about Russian interference in the election. They don't want to talk about the fact that they're proposing massive increases in the military-industrial complex budget, and that means no money for healthcare, no money for tax reform for the middle and class and the poor, no money for the kind of infrastructure that will really rebuild communities. So there's a real breakdown here between the two policies in the budget. Nobody wants to change, and we're going to have to change. We have no choice.
What happens this fall then when the fiscal year's up September 30th? You know all about big numbers, and it
Right.
doesn't look like they're gonna they're gonna arrange everything. David Stockman says, well, when that happens, the president will be basically distributing the money, period, based on what they get in.
Right.
I mean, he'll just be the guy who Chris Christie was gonna do that in New Jersey. And I thought, same thing. No budget, governor's in charge. No budget, president in charge. Well, that's going to create some real havoc, isn't it? Come September, October time period for the stock market.
I think Congress, what I think Congress was hoping was that the debt limit wouldn't come up until they approved the new budget, so they could take care of it in one process. If the money runs out faster, then they're going to have to deal with it specially. I don't see Congress putting the cash flows in a corner whereby the president gets complete control. I don't think they want him to have that. Certainly on the Democratic side of the House. So my guess is that they will bump the debt limit. The debt limit is really a procedural problem. It's not an economic problem. The real economic problem, Greg, is on the budget. And the budget reflects many different issues, but one of the issues it reflects is that we have a hidden system of finance and a black budget and all sorts of secret spending, and it's very difficult to re-engineer the budget unless you bring transparency to what's really been going on. And that's why we focused on enforce the Constitution, because this transparency has to happen. We cannot deal with our problems without re-engineering the budget, and that means re-engineering the whole budget, not just sort of the official story budget.
And I'm holding your second quarter report up. They've stolen tons of money. I mean, that's a real problem. And in your estimation, there is no there with Donald Trump Jr. or Jared Kushner here we have Hillary Clinton selling, a fifth of our uranium production with bribes to her foundation, and that's not a story. But this, of taking a stupid meeting and getting punked is. Go ahead.
Well, Donald Trump took a meeting that was a waste of his time. He got nothing, and it wasn't useful. So who cares?
I know. Right. The press is killing itself. Do you realize, a friend of mine sent me this, that if you had invested $10,000 in Gannett in 2007, you'd have about $2,300 left right now, after reinvestment and everything. Right. I mean, they're stupid. Right. They're stupid. Who in the hell is running these companies?
They're not. Okay, Greg, they're not stupid because there's a difference between news and entertainment. So the conundrum for a CNN is, how do we get ratings and how do we get attention without talking about the real news?
And the real news is Illinois and the budget and how much we're spending and how many insolvent states there are.
No, the real news is that since fiscal 1995, we have disappeared or bailed out or stolen over $40 trillion of our money. And if we're going to balance the budget, we need that $40 trillion or the assets thereon or the liabilities created by the people who stole it back on the table, or else we're toast. Now, if we can give $27 trillion to the banks, I assure you, we can afford $4 trillion of pension fund bailouts. But Mr. Global doesn't want us doing the algebra. If you have an honest news, a serious news effort with people talking about the money, anybody can. This is like fourth grade math. $27 trillion to bail out the banks, and we're not going to bail out the pension funds. What's that? Where does that come from?
And the banks are still not in great shape. Still not in great shape. I mean, here you have even the Federal Reserve having to kind of clean this $1.8 trillion of toxic assets off there without raising rates.
Well, but think of it this way. The banks are vacuum cleaners, okay? And they suck up the $40 trillion and send it someplace. And the place it gets sent to is in great shape, Greg. So, don't fall into the trap of thinking, we're now bankrupt because the $40 trillion is gone. No, it's over here. So we have the industrial system that's slowly dying as globalization technology changes, and then we have a new networked economy coming up, and they stole $40 trillion out of the thing that's dying, and then they moved it over into the thing that's growing, and everybody, our pension funds and retirement savings are over here in the world that's dying. And they said, well, guess what? There's no money. Well, of course, they stole it, but it's still there, and we still have the legal right to those assets. Those were governmental assets.
And that Donald Trump wants to move the money, the $40 trillion, back over to the manufacturing and to the people.
Well, Donald Trump has not said anything about that. But what Donald Trump has said is the way you're running this economy, both the one that's rising and the one that's, sort of dying. So I call it Global 2.0 and Global 3.0. What he said is, the way you're running this is not economic, and this is being drained. Let's stop draining it and make it productive. The problem is,
thus make America great again. Go ahead.
Exactly. So, but what he's saying is, let's get things back on economic sense. And the reality is, a lot of the things going on at the federal government that make no economic sense because they're air cover for theft.
And I want to come back.
What he's saying is, we can't afford the corruption. Let's stop being corrupt.
And you can't have that. Oh, no. Listen, I wanted to say a quick thing, too. I thought this would clear up, and this is a problem with my technology, not yours. You're actually clean on Skype, but it's such a great conversation that I'm just going to go ahead and go with it. I'm getting this little technical problem where the lip sync isn't worked out right now, so just to tell people that really quick. And I wanted to come back to, the IMF. I had DeMartino Booth on, fabulous woman, worked for the Federal Reserve. Her boss was Richard Fisher, who said, hey, we injected cocaine and heroin into the economy to create a wealth effect.
Right.
And she says, listen, they, this just can't go on. What they're doing is not going to go on. And also I had Lynette Zhang on, who is, works as an analyst, and she says, the IMF has said they need a big event, and to complete their reorganization. And she says, I believe them. Their reset, their currency reset. They're on record saying this. Are we going to get a big event this fall, in your humble opinion?
I'm not sure. Right now, I think the uncertainty and the things are very, very fluid. I think it's more likely to happen in 2018. Now, one thing, if you look at the stock market, we are I'm tired of saying this to you. I've said it for every show for 2 years now, but we are way, way overdue for a major correction. And the thing you don't want to do is, if we get that major correction, it's perfectly natural. You don't want to misinterpret that as a major crisis or event. So, I think we're way overdue for a major correction, and I think I give that a reasonable chance between now and November. If it doesn't happen this year, it's definitely going to happen next year. When does the crisis reach unacceptable levels at the international level that calls into question the whole currency system? I don't know, Greg. It really comes down to
but it's coming to
politics.
That, though. But it's coming to that, right? That the currency system is going to be called into question?
Well, here's what's important, okay? What you and I want is to not have central political and economic control or a central digital currency. That's what you and I want. And that's what the IMF and a lot of people are pushing for, because that gives them the ability to harvest the economy at an even deeper, more invasive level globally, okay? And so the last thing we want to do is help them get to that reset. Now, I think one of the reasons they're trying to get to that reset is they're trying to get all the countries not in the central banking system and the BIS system into that system. That's part of the hissy fit about some of the countries in the Middle East and North Korea. They don't have them in yet, and that's part of the frustration with Russia, because Russia is playing a role of stinker in that game. And Russia sees its best interest as keeping those few countries out of the central banking system so that they can't come down. And it's one of the reasons China and Russia are building out their satellite systems, building out their quantum computing systems, and building out their payment systems. So when that time comes, they don't have to go into the G7, global currency, whatever.
Which means if they don't come willingly, then the next thing is war? I mean, will they actually... we just heard on CNN, somebody was talking about how we should just bomb Russia. That's what they're putting out on CNN. You're going to bomb a nuclear-armed country, really?
Well, but the push by the neocons for World War III and war against Russia is essentially to ensure you get a G7 dominance globally of the financial system now before it's too late. So this is all part of preserving the unipolar empire as opposed to moving to a multipolar world. And if you're gonna maintain the G7 dominance, then you've got to get everybody into the 10 and into a digital system, with complete top-down digital control. So I've always assumed that was the point of the 7 countries and 5-year plan that 9/11 helped engineer.
That it doesn't appear to be going to happen. I mean, it looks like that is not going to happen. It looks like Russia's not going to do that. China's not going to do that. North Korea's not going to do that. I mean, that looks like that's the the hitting the immovable object, which means, well, if we're not going to get you to get into our tent, we're going to blow your tent up. Isn't that what you're saying?
Right. And so now the question is, if the multipolar world asserts itself and has to happen and the unipolar model fails, what does that mean to the currency and digital systems? Big question mark.
Oh, boy. Big question mark.
Yeah.
Bitcoin been all over the place. I've had people on both sides of the spectrum saying that it was going to go way up and it's the greatest thing in the world, and because I have to cover it as a reporter. I've had other people say, "Wow, it's it does 7 transactions per second." I mean, I had Kevin Lawton and Warren Pollock saying that the old check writing system does 400 a second. Visa does up to 50,000 transactions a second. I don't know how Bitcoin can be used as a currency. They're going to work on that. But what's your view on Bitcoin and digital currencies? Are they here to stay, or can they work?
Well, I think digital currencies are here to stay because if you look at the global transaction systems, there is real pressure to get transaction costs down sufficiently low to bring the emerging markets and the frontier markets in. The transaction costs that we pay in our financial system in the G7 is way too high. They can't afford them. So there's real pressure to keep prototyping and trying transaction systems that will bring those costs down, and cryptocurrencies is part of that. Now, as you know, my concern about cryptocurrencies is I just think it's a way for Mr. Global to prototype how he's going to create a digital currency. But behind the cryptocurrencies is blockchain technology, which has very powerful potential, and that's why you see serious institutions really making an effort to learn this stuff and figure out how to use it. So right now we're in the invention room. I think, to me, my watchword is always have enough gold to bribe the border guards. I don't want my money all in a digital world. I don't think it's safe. And just as an investment advisor, if I have a client who can put money into a bank that's been operating for 200 years, has great governance and leadership, she has personal relationships with the bank, they give her not only a strong capital structure, but FDIC deposit insurance. And the alternative, she can put something into the Wild West where the exchanges can get hacked or go down, and and the prices are extremely volatile. I mean, there's no one is a highly speculative experimentation, and the other is a very solid financial option. So as long as you understand that this is very new, very novel, the infrastructure isn't worked out, the regulations and taxes aren't worked out, and there are all sorts of fraud and pump and dump problems going on. As long as you understand that you're in the Wild West, I will tell people feel free to experiment, but just don't put anything else. Don't put anything in cryptocurrencies that you don't keep on your own wallet, number one, offline, and number two, be prepared to lose everything you put in.
I want to talk about gold and silver, because I don't talk to you about that very often. Gold has been hovering around the 15, 12, 20 mark.
Right.
Silver's at 16, 17 bucks, somewhere in that, hovering around that mark. A lot of people are saying it's going to take off, that we are going to get in a situation where either A, central banks will force it up because, wow, we can make some money, or B, governments will get so shaky that, people will flood into there. Yeah. So what is your view on precious metals?
I was really worried that the dollar was going to continue up, and I think if Congress and the president had gotten on the same page, we could have seen a dollar as high as 104, 106. I understand the president now doesn't want that. He wants to export more, but I was really worried in that case that we could break the 1100 line and head down as low as 700 on gold. I don't think that the odds of that happening now are much, much lower. So I feel a little bit more comfortable with gold on the downside. I don't see gold as being, to me, gold right now is a core position. It's not an attractive investment. I don't see it going, anywhere. If any market is in a bull market, it's equities, and I think that's going to continue, correction or no. So I just don't see gold as being a good investment here, Greg. I do think it's an absolutely essential core position for any person, and especially if it's offline. So as I said, never hold all your assets in digital form, and gold is a perfect way to keep things out of the digital system and out of the brokerage system. So I love gold, so you know me, but I just don't see it being good here. My concern is if the warmongers get their way and push towards any kind of minor wars in the Middle East or major wars globally, we could really see gold break through the 1100 line. If it does, then
go down.
War there.
So war would drive gold down.
To 700. We can go down to 700 and still be in a long-term bull market for gold.
But you take war would that sounds almost counterintuitive. I'm not arguing with you either, but that almost sounds counterintuitive. War would drive gold prices down. Most people would think war would drive it up.
Yeah, war will give the G7 the ability to manipulate the price down as much as they want. So it gives them the monetary. And here's the thing: the central bankers understand the value of gold. They value gold. They use gold. It's the ultimate form of, of how they count their chits at the end of the day. But they don't care what the retail price is. They can manipulate the retail price all day long without it really affecting their operations. So I think in the case of where G7 is dominant, they can push that price way down, and it can help them. It can help them build their stores of gold in the worst case. So especially if they're doing what they did in Libya, which is scarfing and vacuuming up more gold. So I just see war as being very deflationary for the gold price, unless the G7 loses, and then we're going to have other problems.
Yeah, other problems.
Right.
I will think I'll end on that note. I mean, you got to go on to Solari.com to get it. We've only done just really a small portion of what she laid out here in her nice, glossy, beautiful quarterly report, which you put out for people who, if you don't have a lot of time, you read this, what's been going on for the last 3 months, and you can move on with your life, or you can go dig deep and see your interviews and all your podcasts and all your writings on Solari.com.
So this the second quarter wrap-up theme, Greg, is enforce the Constitution or you can kiss your money goodbye.
Yep. And
we made a little 4-page cartoon, which is up on our homepage. So if you come to Solari.com, you can get the cartoon. And if you want more, then dive in and get all the detail. It was I flew over to Bangladesh. I was in Australia, then Sydney, then Hong Kong, and then Bangladesh, so that I could interview Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney about how we would enforce the Constitution. So I spent a week with her just talking through the nuts and bolts of what a Congresswoman would tell you about how we do this.
And that's on Solari.com, correct?
Yep.
Give me one big takeaway point from Congressman McKinney.
Number one, if we don't enforce the Constitution, we could literally lose everything. If we do enforce the Constitution, the sky's the limit of what's possible in terms of our role in the world and the prosperity of ourselves, of our economy. We can do it, but it's going to take a significant number of people coming together and towing the line down. And again, if we don't, we could lose everything. So she's saying, this is the big 0 or 1. We have had many, many decades of blessings as Americans, and if we throw those blessings away, we're toast.
They're attacking Donald Trump, and vicious attack, and he's withheld, and his family members have withheld these attacks, which got to be freaking them out. I mean, here we have. Just let me hold this up. I held this up in my weekly news wrap up last week, and they are laying hands on him. This is an epic battle between good and evil. Of course, CNN and others are making fun of this, about praying to God the Father and Jesus Christ. Of course, we know how that all ends. But this is an epic battle between good and evil, is it not? And that'll be your last question, is it not?
It is an epic battle between good and evil, and if we can get everybody in America to turn off their TV, good wins.
Good wins. That's a good answer. Again, Catherine Austin Fitz here, a Solari report at solari.com. It's just packed full of good stuff. The website's fabulous. You can become a subscriber. There's also free information on the homepage. For you home gamers out there, if you go to the right through, I'll send links back to the USA Watchdog and the after the interview. Catherine Austin Fitz, thank you so much for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Greg, always a pleasure. Have a great day.
You too.